I woke up that morning with the kind of quiet anticipation you don't voice aloud. Not excitement like a kid waiting on presents, but a softer, grown-up kind of hope. It was my birthday, 42. No party, no surprise trip planned. I wasn't asking for fireworks. I just wanted a moment. A smile over breakfast, maybe a candle and a slice of toast. A laugh shared before the day unraveled into errands or obligations. The kind of moment that said, "Hey, we still see you." But when I stepped into the kitchen, barefoot, coffee brewing in my head before the machine even clicked on, Maribel was already dressed, hair done, makeup applied, earrings that didn't say lazy Saturday, and mascara on in soft, practice strokes. She looked beautiful, but not for me. That much was obvious. Her heels clicked softly on the tiles as she leaned into the mirror over the sink, barely sparing me a glance. I cleared my throat. She didn't flinch. "We're heading to Micah's barbecue," she said, adjusting her lipstick without turning to face me. Micah, my younger brother, the golden one, the one who always managed to throw something together and have people call it genius. I opened the fridge, looking for the orange juice I'd bought the night before. Next to it sat the chocolate cake I'd picked up, my favorite. German chocolate, triple-layered, with the little curl shavings on top that reminded me of birthdays when I was a kid and the world still paused for me. I bought it just in case someone forgot and I needed to rescue the moment. Apparently, I'd been right. Tessa bounced into the room next, hair in a ponytail, denim jacket half on. "Uncle Mike is grilling his famous ribs, Dad," she chirped, kissing me quickly on the cheek. "We'll bring you back a plate." Bring me back a plate. She might as well have said, "We'll remember you later." Then Maribel let out a laugh. Not cruel, just careless. "It's just a birthday," she said, grabbing her purse off the counter and walking out like the sentence had no weight. As if just a birthday wasn't shorthand for every other time they'd slowly let my importance slip. I stood there for a second, watching them move like a well-oiled machine, Tessa grabbing the keys, Maribel adjusting her sunglasses. Not one of them asked if I wanted to come. Not one of them even thought I might want to. That was the part that got me. Not the absence of celebration, but the assumption that I didn't matter enough to consider. I smiled, not because it didn't hurt. Because right then, standing barefoot on the cool kitchen tile, looking at the cake I bought for myself, I made a decision. One that I didn't know I'd been circling for months. Maybe even years. The kind of decision that doesn't scream. It whispers. And it changes everything. They had no idea what I would do next. The front door opened and closed again, twice. Car doors followed, 1, 2. Laughter echoed from the driveway as they pulled away, the engine's hum fading until silence swallowed the house again. I moved through the kitchen slowly, deliberately. Poured myself a cup of coffee, no cream, no sugar. Sat down at the island across from the untouched cake. My eyes traced the ridges in the frosting, the little candle I hadn't lit, the name Silas in piped white chocolate that was starting to sag a little. I reached for a fork, then stopped. No, not yet. I wouldn't cut into that cake. Not because I was waiting for them, but because I wanted that cake to stay exactly as it was, a symbol of the version of me they thought would keep waiting. I sipped my coffee and stared at it like it might give me permission. That's when I noticed the faint sound of the clock ticking on the living room wall. I hadn't heard it in years. Funny how silence reveals the background you've long tuned out. The clock, the hum of the fridge, the breath of the house when no one is demanding space. I let it all settle around me, like dust in a beam of morning light. 42. And I felt invisible, not in a dramatic, self-pitying way. In the way that happens gradually, like being buried in snow, flake by flake, moment by moment. You don't even realize it's happening until you're frozen solid under the weight of being ignored. I looked down at my hand. Steady, still strong, still mine. That was when the shift happened. Something uncurled inside me. Something I hadn't listened to in years. A voice that said, "You don't have to keep living like this." It wasn't about the party. It wasn't about the ribs. It wasn't even about Maribel or Tessa. It was about me. And the fact that I had made it through 42 years of life, supporting people who didn't know how to say thank you unless it came with a post or a filter, who thought showing up meant sharing a plate of ribs and sending leftovers, who laughed off my day like it was just another square on a calendar. No. I was done waiting for applause that never came. I stood up and opened the cabinet above the fridge. Inside was a file folder labeled Contingency Projects. They thought it was for taxes. But inside were papers I hadn't looked at since I first had the urge to carve a space just for myself. I pulled it down and placed it next to the cake. I didn't know the full shape of my next steps, not yet. But I knew this. I wasn't staying where I wasn't seen. I took one last look at the candle on the counter. Then I turned away. The silence after they left wasn't ordinary. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against your chest, like the house itself had noticed the absence of recognition and didn't know how to respond. I sat alone in the kitchen, the ticking wall clock growing louder with every second. Their scent still lingered, Maribel's expensive perfume, Tessa's fruity hair mist, and I hated that I noticed. I hated even more that I missed it, that it mattered to me. But more than anything, I hated that it wasn't mutual. The coffee in my cup had gone lukewarm, but I took another sip anyway. The bitterness sat on my tongue longer than it should have. The cake sat on the kitchen island across from me, still whole, untouched, too perfect. The candles I'd pulled from the junk drawer the night before were lined up next to it, 42 of them, all waiting for the fire that would never come. I'd arranged it quietly after everyone had gone to bed. Told myself it was just in case they'd forgotten, just in case life distracted them. I was trying to be fair, trying to be reasonable. I thought it would be better to have something than nothing. But the truth was, deep down, I'd known. I leaned back in my chair and scanned the room. Spotless. Maribel liked things neat. No clutter, no stray dishes, nothing that hinted at life being lived. Even the family photos on the wall looked curated, not remembered. Stiff smiles, orchestrated vacations, events we smiled through but barely felt. The only genuine image on that wall was from when Tessa was 4 and covered in cake at her own birthday party. Her grin was wild and lopsided. My hands were on her little shoulders in that picture, mid-laugh, frosting on my cheek. Back when I was allowed to matter. I pushed the chair back, the legs scraping softly against the floor, and stood. I walked slowly through the living room, then down the hallway to her bedroom. The bed was made, corners crisp, pillows fluffed. Not a single sign it was my birthday, not even a post-it. She hadn't written a card in 5 years. I used to save them, every note, every doodle, even grocery list with hearts scribbled beside my name. One by one, those little tokens disappeared, and I had let them. I walked back to the kitchen and stood in front of the cake again. I reached out and pulled the lid off the plastic container. The sweetness hit me. Coconut, chocolate, buttercream. I stared at it for a long time. Then I grabbed a knife, not to cut the cake, but to press the flat of it against my palm, cold and steady. I needed to feel something solid, something real. It wasn't about the party. It wasn't even about the ribs. It was about being invisible in my own home. And not just today, every day. It was about all the dinners I made that got eaten in silence. About the way conversations happened around me like I was a piece of furniture. About the photos posted online with captions like Family Day, where I was either cropped out or holding someone else's purse in the background. About being reliable, the safe one, the one they didn't have to think about because they assumed I'd always be there. But I wasn't going to be anymore. I went to the drawer near the fridge and pulled out a notebook I hadn't touched in over a year. Black cover, thick pages. It used to be for jotting down ideas. Business ventures, family trip itineraries, even some poetry once, though I never told anyone. I flipped past the empty pages until I found a section labeled contingencies. I'd written that word as a joke, but the joke wasn't funny anymore. 3 months ago, I'd scribbled a bullet list on one of those pages. Opened new LLC with attorney. Transferred savings account to business fund. Requested backup apartment listing from Quentin. Initiated private trust application. At the time, it was just a mental safety net. Something I did on instinct after Micah asked for help with his real estate project and Maribel rolled her eyes when I tried to tell her about it. That was the day I realized I needed to build something that didn't rely on anyone else's permission. I thumbed the corner of the page, then opened my phone and scrolled down to Damaris Wade. My attorney. Quiet, sharp, efficient. She never said much, but when she did, it was precise. I hovered over the call button. Do it. My finger tapped the screen before I could talk myself out of it. She picked up after one ring. Silas, she said, voice calm and crisp. It's time, I said. Let's move forward. There was no hesitation. I've been waiting for this call. I'll begin the transition. You'll receive the full portfolio transfer confirmation by Monday. Anything else? I stared at the cake again. No, that's all for now. She hung up, and just like that, the gears started turning. I placed the phone on the counter and exhaled longer than I had in weeks. The air in the house shifted, not literally, but in my mind. Like the walls had stopped pressing in. Like the floor had stopped stealing my heat. It felt like reclamation. Like remembering who I was before I became just dependable. I went to the living room and opened the blinds. The sunlight flooded in, bright and unfiltered. I stood there in it, face tilted, chest steady. I didn't need a party. I needed recognition. And if they weren't going to give it to me, I would give it to myself. I walked back to the island, picked up one of the candles, and lit it. Just one. Not for a wish, not for a song, just to mark the moment. I stared into the tiny flame, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt awake. The thing about younger brothers is that no one ever tells you how easily charm can mask a lifetime of irresponsibility. Micah had always been the golden one, the center of attention. It started early. He had that smile that made people forgive things. Teachers gave him second chances. Girls swooned. Even when he messed up, someone else swept in to clean the mess. Usually, that someone was me. And the worst part? I let them call it love. When he dropped out of grad school after a single semester, citing some dramatic revelation about living on his own terms, Mom called it brave. Dad called it visionary. Maribel, then just my girlfriend, said, Mike has always been the creative type. He'll land on his feet. I didn't say anything, just quietly co-signed his car loan so he could have reliable transportation while he figured things out. That was Micah's way: trip, stumble, and always fall into someone else's safety net. When he crashed that second car a year later after a night out, guess who paid for the repairs? Me. When he needed help launching his pop-up food truck idea that lasted 6 weeks and drained his credit, I helped with the paperwork. When he ghosted on Tessa's science fair after promising to build her a volcano model, I stayed up all night with glue and baking soda. And what did I get in return? A front row seat to the Micah show. Every family event, every dinner, every gathering, we orbited him like he was the sun. He cracked jokes, poured drinks, gave toasts that made people cry. People said he was magnetic. I watched them hand him admiration I had spent years trying to earn the hard way. With consistency, effort, and sacrifice. But nothing stung more than the way Maribel leaned into his charm like she'd forgotten who she married. It started subtly. Mike is so thoughtful. Did you see what he brought Tessa? Or Micah's place is always so vibrant. Maybe we should hang out there more often. Then it became blatant. Text chains between them, private jokes I wasn't included in. She swore it was nothing. I believed her, mostly. But I knew the shift when I saw it. I could feel when I had stopped being seen. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was the guy who paid the bills and picked up dinner. Micah didn't need to cross any lines to make me disappear. He just had to keep being Micah, unapologetically self-centered and recklessly adored. And that birthday morning, when they walked out laughing, their absence was more than physical. It was generational. A pattern that had repeated itself one too many times. So I sat with it. Sat with the feeling of being used up and cast aside, of being the man who did the work but never got the toast. Then I stood up and walked to the den. On the far bookshelf, behind some old business textbooks and a dusty chessboard, was the red accordion folder I hadn't touched in months. The one with the label, Marrow. That was the project name. A real estate initiative Micah had pitched me casually over steaks 3 months ago. Silas, man, this is it, he'd said, waving his fork like a wand. Joint ownership. Mixed-use property in the East Ridge District. You bring the funding, I bring the flair. We'll build something that lasts. At first, I didn't even consider it. But then I thought, what if I could finally turn Micah's theatrics into something real? Something that would benefit us both. So I did my due diligence. I hired a consultant, quietly filed for an LLC, covered the initial legal and inspection fees. He didn't even notice. He assumed we were co-owners because we talked about it over steak and bourbon. But the papers? They were in my name. Sole proprietor. Silent partner. Everything tied to my contributions. I hadn't planned to use it against him. Back then, I still wanted to share. Still wanted to believe family loyalty was stronger than resentment. But now? Now I saw the truth with brutal clarity. I was never going to be their priority. Not unless I forced them to confront what my absence looked like. So I pulled the file out, placed it on the dining table next to my cold coffee, and opened it. It was all there: ownership documents, project proposals, email threads, signed disclosures, all the receipts, all the proof that Micah's new venture, the one he'd bragged about at every dinner and in every Instagram post, didn't belong to him. It belonged to me. And suddenly, I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. For years, I'd let them treat me like furniture, something useful but overlooked. But furniture can be moved, removed, replaced. I flipped through the folder until I found the card tucked between 2 pages, Damaris Wade. My attorney. Brilliant. Cold. Quiet. Just like I needed her to be. She'd advised me from the start, cautious and clear-eyed. I picked up my phone and tapped her contact. Damaris, I said when she answered. Mr. Ward, she replied. Are we proceeding? I looked at the cake still sitting on the counter. I thought of Tessa's excited voice about ribs. I thought of Maribel's dismissive chuckle. Yes, I said. Let's initiate the shift. I want full asset transition to the holding trust. Notify the board. There was a pause, then a clipped, satisfied tone. Understood. You'll receive confirmations by end of business Monday. I ended the call and sat back. They thought reliability was a weakness, that my silence meant submission. But silence is where plans grow, where resolve sharpens. They had never seen what it looked like when the stable man stopped stabilizing everyone else. They would now. Micah had spent a lifetime charming the world into forgiveness. I had spent it building without applause. He thought the business was his ticket to independence. He thought I was just funding it out of brotherly support. But he was about to learn what support looks like when it walks away and takes the foundation with it. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back. Outside, the sun had reached its peak. Bright, blinding, mocking. Let them eat ribs. Let them laugh. Let them live a day without wondering what happens when the background becomes the story. I was done waiting for recognition. Now, I was writing my own. 3 months ago, over a dinner that started too casual to matter, Micah dropped the idea on me like it was a favor. We were at his favorite spot downtown, a bistro with exposed brick and overpriced sliders where he knew the bartender by name and the chef by nickname. He ordered a bottle of wine before I even sat down, flashed that signature grin at the waitress, and launched into the pitch without waiting to hear how my day had gone. Silas, man, listen, this is the one, he said, biting into a truffle fry like he was chewing on a secret. Eastridge. For lots. Zoned for mixed use. Think, retail on the bottom, lofts up top. Urban vibe. Young families. Coffee shops. You and me, we'd crush it. I nodded slowly, letting him talk. Micah always had ideas. Some good, most not. But this one, it had potential. Eastridge was growing fast. I'd been watching it too. The difference was, I didn't lead with the flair. I led with spreadsheets, due diligence, property tax records. Boring things that built lasting foundations. You'd handle the numbers, of course, he went on, swirling his wine. I'll do the design, the branding, the marketing splash. We bring that Micah and Silas energy. That Micah and Silas energy. As if I were just the trailing ampersand to his spotlight. But I smiled, said I'd think about it. And when I got home that night, I did more than think. I researched zoning permits. I found an attorney. I filed the LLC paperwork, under my name only. Quietly covered the structural inspection fees. Paid a retainer to an architectural consultant. I moved in the shadows because I wasn't ready to share. Not yet. Not until I knew what he was really offering. Partnership or just another show with me footing the bill. At the time, I thought I was protecting both of us. I told myself it was just a precaution, a way to keep things clean in case Micah's enthusiasm burned hot and fizzled out like it usually did. But somewhere inside, a part of me had stopped trusting him. Not out of bitterness, out of experience. Micah had a pattern, charm, pitch, fade, vanish. And when things collapsed, I was the safety net. I was the apology. I was the emergency contact. But this time, I laid the net for myself. I didn't expect to need it. I didn't want to. Not until my birthday morning, standing in a kitchen filled with everything but warmth, watching my wife laugh off the day and my daughter echo her words like a song she'd memorized. That's when I realized the plan I'd built for caution had become a lifeline. I picked up the manila folder from my desk. It was labeled Marrow Dev Holdings. Inside, the original operating agreement, a list of property assessments, correspondence with zoning officials, the trust account routing numbers, all of it mine. Micah thought the dream was his, that I was just the wallet, but I had been the architect all along. I sat back in the chair, the weight of it settling into my chest. Not guilt, not revenge. Clarity. I hadn't built this to take something from him. I built it to protect what I was finally starting to admit I deserved. Credit. Presence. Power. They had erased me in plain sight. My wife, my daughter, my brother. Not maliciously, worse. Casually. Like I'd never needed a seat at the table because I'd always be standing behind it, serving. So I picked up the phone and called Damaris Wade. She answered on the first ring. Silas. Her voice was the opposite of Micah's. Measured, grounded, always listening even in silence. Let's move forward, I said. You're sure? She asked. This will close out Micah's standing rights in the partnership proposal. We'll shift the full development under your name, with the trust assuming final control. It's clean, but final. I'm sure, I said. She didn't gloat. She didn't linger. She just said, you'll receive the updated draft for review this afternoon. And Silas. Yes. Good move. I hung up and placed the phone face down on the table. The room felt different. Like the air had changed weight. It wasn't a dramatic shift. There was no orchestral swell in the background. Just the subtle, echoing click of something locking into place inside me. I got up and walked through the house. Each step deliberate. I paused in the hallway, where a row of family portraits lined the wall. There was one of us at the beach. Tessa was tin, buried in sand. Maribel was laughing, and I was half out of frame, holding the umbrella, squinting into the sun. Another showed us at Micah's food truck launch. He was front and center, arms wide, laughing with a spatula in hand. I was behind him, handing someone a napkin. Always helpful. Always cropped out. I stared at those photos and thought, this isn't how I want to be remembered. I want to be present. In the frame. With my name on the bottom. So I pulled the photos down. One by one. Not to destroy them. Just to remind myself that I didn't need to stay in the background if I didn't want to. In the garage, I found the duffel bag I used for weekend trips. I packed a few things, laptop, documents, a change of clothes. I didn't need much. Not yet. I wasn't running. I was transitioning. I placed the bag by the front door and sat down at the kitchen island again. The cake was still there, perfect and uncut. The candles in their box. I didn't touch them. They weren't for today. They were a reminder of yesterday. I opened my laptop and typed up a brief note. To whom it may concern. The man you forgot yesterday has remembered himself. This space will no longer serve as your fallback. Kindly direct future correspondence to the address on file. I printed it, folded it neatly, and placed it beside the cake. Then I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and watched the sunlight trace a line across the countertop. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was ready. The backup plan I never meant to use had become the doorway forward. And when they came home, when they asked questions or tried to explain or called it a misunderstanding, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I had already said everything I needed to. With action. With silence. With the kind of presence they could no longer ignore. The day after my birthday, the sun rose like any other, gold bleeding across the hardwood floors, warm against the windows. I stirred from the couch in the guest room, not because I couldn't sleep in the master, but because I didn't want to. Not anymore. That space, that bed. It all felt like a museum to a version of me they'd outgrown. I needed distance, even inside my own home. It was strange, waking up in silence and not missing the noise. Stranger still was how natural it felt. With a mug of black coffee in my hand and the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet, I sat at the kitchen island, across from the untouched cake again. Still flawless. Still waiting for hands that would never slice it. I opened my phone, idly at first, the way people scroll out of habit, not expectation. I didn't expect what I saw. Micah had posted it around 6:30 p.m. the evening before. Right around the time, I had been lighting one single candle for myself, sitting in the dimness of a house no one thought to fill with company. The caption read, family, food, love, nothing better. Attached were 4 pictures, perfectly filtered, perfectly arranged like snapshots of a magazine shoot. The first one was him in front of the grill, apron on, a big grin pasted across his face like this was a stage, and of course, it was. Behind him, you could see people laughing, drinks raised, the glow of string lights overhead. Summer in its most curated form. The second was worse. Maribel, my wife, laughing at something Micah had clearly said, her hand placed casually on his shoulder like it belonged there. The familiarity of it wasn't new, but seeing it through someone else's camera lens, frozen, public, adored, something inside me clenched. The third photo? Tessa, my daughter, my bright, once awkward, fiercely loyal girl, now beaming with a paper plate in hand, ribs stacked high. Micah playfully stealing one off the top. They were both mid-laugh. Her eyes crinkled in a way I hadn't seen around me in months. There was no room in that moment for the man who raised her. The final picture was a group shot. I counted at least 15 people. Friends. Neighbors. Micah's rotating crowd of charm chasers. And all of them smiling like this was the celebration of the year. Not one of them had thought to ask where I was. Not one glance toward the man who financed Micah's life more times than he could count. And then I saw it, below the post, a comment from someone I vaguely recognized. Looks amazing. But where's Silas? Maribel replied, he's resting. It's just a birthday, grinning face with sweat. 311 likes. 2 shares. Multiple comments. And that one, simple sentence. It's just a birthday. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the phone screen dimmed and my reflection looked back at me, older, tired, jaw tight. I tapped the screen again, took a screenshot of the post, then another of the comments. I opened my printer app and hit send. A few seconds later, the pages landed in the tray like court documents. I grabbed them, folded them in half, and slid them into a red folder labeled Perspective. A single word that now felt heavier than most conversations I'd had in the last year. Perspective. That's what this was. I used to think maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe adulthood meant accepting that birthdays fade, that attention shifts, that people forget. But no, this wasn't forgetting. This was dismissal. I hadn't been overlooked. I had been erased. I sat with that realization for a long time. Let it breathe. Let it burn a little. And then, with a kind of eerie calm, I opened a blank document on my laptop and began listing things. Names, dates, numbers. People I'd supported. Times I'd stepped up. Costs I'd covered. Promises I'd kept. Not to gloat. To document. To remind myself that I was never the background. At some point in the process, I pulled up the joint project folder for Meryl. I highlighted every communication from Micah that used the phrase, our project. I cross-referenced that with the actual documents that had only my signature, only my financial backing, only my legal name. I added copies to the red folder. It wasn't about being petty. It was about making sure I remembered the story correctly. Because if I left it up to them, I'd be the guy who rested through his own birthday while they partied with ribs and forgot his seat at the table. My phone buzzed again. A message from Micah. Yo bro, you good? Maribel said you were laying low. Hope you're enjoying the peace, haha. We missed you. He missed me. Like I was a detail. A flavor he forgot to sprinkle on the plate. I didn't reply. I just stared at the text until it blurred. Then another came in. From Maribel. Morning. Tessa wants to bring you leftovers later. She felt bad you weren't there. Let me know if you want some. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just leftovers. I turned off the phone, placed it face down again, and stood up. I moved through the house with a purpose now. Picked up the spare keys. Pulled out the duffel I had packed the night before. I grabbed the red folder and added it to the bag. Before I left, I returned to the cake. Still there. Still untouched. I didn't throw it out. I didn't slice into it either. I placed it gently into the fridge, a symbol of what was left behind. Then I taped a note to the refrigerator door, just a simple phrase written in black ink. You were looking at him the whole time. That was it. No speeches. No confrontation. Just the truth in writing, waiting for them when they returned. And then I walked out the door. Just me. No fireworks. No slamming. No goodbye. Because sometimes the loudest sound you can make is choosing silence over scraps. And I was done settling for crumbs. By dawn, I was already awake, lying in the guest bed with my hands behind my head, staring at the ceiling like it owed me answers. But I wasn't angry anymore. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after clarity. A calm you don't expect, like standing in the eye of a storm after you've already decided you're done trying to patch the roof. I had already packed the night before. My bag was waiting by the front door, folded neat like a soldier's uniform. The red folder was tucked inside, right on top. It wasn't just documentation anymore. It was my new mirror, a record of what I'd done, what I'd built, and who I was when nobody else thought I was worth remembering. The sun crept over the horizon, staining the living room walls gold. The house was still, too still, like it was bracing for a change it knew was coming. I stood in the kitchen one last time, staring at the cake in the fridge. I didn't take it. That cake had served its purpose. It had witnessed the shift, the moment a man remembered his worth while a candle flickered alone. I brewed one last cup of coffee black, no cream. I drank it slowly, letting each sip remind me that this, right here, Was the last time I'd taste anything in this house as the man they thought they owned. After rinsing my mug, I walked through the living room, brushing my fingers along the backs of chairs and the edge of the mantel. I wasn't being sentimental. I wasn't reminiscing. I was checking in with myself, making sure the decision still sat right in my chest. It did. In fact, it had never felt righter. By 7:15 a.m., I was logged into my accounts on my laptop. I canceled the electricity, the water, the gas, every single utility tied to my name. All of them were in my name. The house, the accounts, even the security system. I had paid every bill on time for 18 years. I was the one they leaned on, the foundation they'd paved over. And now, I was removing the ground beneath their feet. I printed out the final confirmation emails and slipped them into the folder. Then I opened the property deed. The house, legally, was mine. Bought it before I married Maribel, refinanced it once after Tessa was born. I had transferred it into a private trust last year for estate purposes, again, at the advice of Damaris Wade. Smart woman, she had asked back then, are you protecting them or yourself? I hadn't known how to answer at the time, but now I did. I printed one more document, a note, not emotional, not angry, just a string of clean, sharp sentences. The kind of note you leave when you want the truth to echo louder than any explanation. Maribel, this isn't a tantrum. It's a transition. This house is no longer available for occupancy under its previous assumptions. Please forward mail to the address on file. The man you forgot yesterday has reclaimed his name today. Silas. I signed it, folded it twice, and placed it on the entry table. Then I changed the locks. It wasn't difficult. I'd bought the replacement kit a week earlier. Maybe some part of me knew this day would come. The clink of the metal was steady, rhythmic, almost meditative. One lock, then the deadbolt, then the code on the keypad. All new, all mine. When it was done, I stood at the front door and looked around one last time. The furniture was still there. The smell of Maribel's lavender diffuser lingered faintly in the hall. Tessa's sneakers were still by the stairs. Nothing looked different, but everything had changed. I grabbed my bag and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, clean. I locked the door behind me and walked to my car without looking back. By the time Maribel and Tessa pulled into the driveway that evening, the sky was already dimming. I watched them from the security feed. Damaris had helped set it up through the trust. I was logged in remotely from Quentin's condo downtown, sipping espresso, legs stretched out on his balcony. He was out of town for the week, and the place had a view of the skyline that made you feel like possibility was just waiting to be claimed. The footage played out like a silent film. Maribel stepped out first, keys in hand, sunglasses still perched on her head like the day hadn't ended. Tessa followed, scrolling on her phone, her laughter caught in a mid-scroll blur. Then the confusion hit. Maribel tried the key. Once. Twice. She looked at it like it had betrayed her. Tessa leaned in, tried the keypad. It blinked red. Wrong code. They knocked. First politely, then harder, then fists. Then confusion turned to panic. I watched the text roll in on my phone. Maribel, Silas, what's going on? The door won't open. Tessa, Dad? Are you home? Did something happen? I didn't respond. Then the calls came. First from Maribel. Then Micah. Micah, yo bro, something's wrong at the house. Maribel says the locks are changed. Can you call me? Micah, this about the birthday thing? Man, we thought you were cool with it. It was just ribs, dude. Come on. Just ribs. Just a birthday. Just a man they didn't think would ever walk away. I muted the feed and leaned back in the chair, watching the city lights flicker on. Each one was a reminder that the world didn't end when people stopped seeing you. It began when you saw yourself clearly. That night, as I stood in Quentin's kitchen pouring another cup of coffee, I stared at my reflection in the glass door. I didn't look different, but I felt it. Lighter. Sharper. Like a man who had stopped asking for space and started claiming it. The texts kept coming. Dozens of them. I let them sit there. Because when they finally understood what had happened, what I had done, it wouldn't be the silence that hurt them most. It would be the realization that I didn't need to shout to leave. All I had to do was close the door. Micah tried calling 6 times before he gave up. The first voicemail came in breathless, all false brotherly charm wrapped in panic. Hey bro, what's up with the funding? I just talked to the Eastridge team, and they said everything's frozen. You pulled out? What's going on? His voice cracked like a man who just realized the stage he was dancing on had no floor. It was the first time in years he'd ever sounded like the one left out of the loop. And I didn't return the call. But someone did. Damaris Wade didn't wait for my permission to send the letter. She knew the timeline, and the documentation had been prepped and waiting for my signal. Micah received the full packet that morning, a thick envelope delivered to his door with zero fanfare and maximum clarity. The cover letter alone was a masterpiece. One page, double-spaced, emotionless, and brutal. Dear Mr. Ward, this letter serves as legal notice of the execution of Asset Consolidation Protocol 7A per Section 4.2 of the Merrow Development Agreement. Effective immediately, all access to current and projected assets under the Merrow Holdings Trust are suspended pending formal reassignment under sole proprietor Silas Ward. Per your assigned position in the partnership clause and absence of financial contribution, no compensation or consideration is owed. This is final. Respectfully, Damaris Wade, ESQ. She blind copied me on the email version. I read it twice with a kind of still satisfaction. Not pleasure, not revenge, just confirmation. This was what accountability looked like. Not a fight, a finish line. He called again after that. This time his voice wasn't casual. You really did this? He asked on the voicemail, voice cracking. You just cut me out? After everything? We were building something, Silas. You can't be serious. But I was. And I hadn't cut him out. He had never been inside to begin with. He just assumed he was, because I never told him otherwise. Because I stayed quiet too long. Maribel reached out next. Her messages were gentler, more calculated. Maribel, Silas, can we talk? This thing with Micah. This isn't about the business, is it? I get it. You're hurt. But don't let one birthday destroy everything. Destroy everything? As if I'd taken a hammer to something pristine. As if we hadn't already been standing in the wreckage of a marriage built on routine and pretense. She called again. I didn't answer. Not yet. But when the texts kept coming, I sent her a message. Just one. Simple. Measured. Final. This isn't revenge. This is revelation. She didn't reply. I don't know if she understood it then. Maybe not even now. But that was the truth. I hadn't done any of this to get back at her. I hadn't iced Micah out to hurt him. I wasn't tearing things down. I was revealing what had already been broken. Revealing how easily they all leaned on my silence and mistook it for indifference. How they used my reliability as cover for their selfishness. How they'd long since stopped asking if I was okay, because they assumed I would always be. But I wasn't okay, and I had finally decided to stop pretending I was. By the end of that week, news started to spread through Micah's little network. Developers began pulling out. The bank froze the credit line. A few of the contractors reached out directly, asking if Merrow was still happening or if they should redirect their bids. I responded to each email politely. Thank you for your interest. Please direct all further inquiries to Damaris Wade at Wade Legal Associates. Merrow Holdings remains under exclusive proprietorship. Micah must have known he had no ground to stand on, because his last message wasn't a plea. It was bitter. Micah, you think this makes you the bigger man? You blindsided me, Silas. Over a damn barbecue. Over one birthday. You could have just said something. But no, you had to make a scene. Quietly, of course. Just like always. You were always too proud to admit you were jealous. Jealous. That word landed, but not the way he expected. I wasn't jealous of him. I pitied him. The man who needed constant applause, who mistook validation for love and attention for loyalty. The man who thought charm could substitute for commitment. Who believed the world owed him a standing ovation just for showing up. I was done clapping. That Friday, I went for a walk downtown. Not out of sadness, but out of curiosity. The streets felt different when you weren't rushing home to a place that felt more like a stage than a sanctuary. I passed a storefront with a coming soon sign in the window. Coffee shop, exposed brick, big glass windows. I thought about renting the space. Maybe starting something that had my name on it, literally. Not for profit. For presence. For identity. I hadn't made a decision yet, but the idea didn't feel like fantasy. It felt like permission. Later that evening, I found myself back on Quentin's balcony. The city pulsed below, lights blinking like stars just within reach. I poured a drink and sat with my back against the glass, letting the hum of traffic and the occasional siren mix into a kind of ambient peace. The texts had finally stopped. The silence was welcome. I thought back to the day Micah pitched me the Merrow idea. His excitement. His wine-fueled metaphors. The way he said, we'll build something that matters. He was right about one thing. We had built something that mattered. He just didn't realize the foundation had always been me. The next morning, I mailed a package to myself, certified delivery. Inside was the red folder. Everything I compiled. Everything that proved I'd stepped out of the margins and onto the page. I wasn't going to hide it in a drawer again. I wanted it stamped, sealed, tracked. A monument to the day I stopped waiting for people to give me permission to matter. Micah could throw another barbecue. He could fire up the grill and invite the whole neighborhood. But there wouldn't be a post this time. No group photos. Number 300 likes. Because the man who made things stable was no longer holding it together. And without him, the whole thing started to fall apart. Let it. That night, after all the calls had died down and the messages faded into unread threads, I returned to the one place that had remained untouched since this all began, the kitchen island. The cake still sat there, pristine beneath its clear plastic lid, a monument to everything they had missed. 42 years of life, 30 of which I had spent playing the role of everyone's dependable husband, brother, father, problem solver, and not one of them thought to cut a slice with me. I reached into the drawer beside the fridge, the one with all the miscellaneous things, old batteries, half-used candles, stray keys that opened forgotten locks, and I pulled out a single candle. Just one. I didn't need a number anymore. I'd stopped counting how many times I put myself last. I unwrapped it and stuck it gently in the middle of the cake. It was absurd, really, this grown man standing in a quiet kitchen, lighting a birthday candle by himself. But it wasn't for show. It wasn't for anyone's timeline or attention. This was mine. This was for the part of me that had waited too long for permission to be celebrated. I lit the wick and watched the small flame flicker to life. It was unsteady at first, like it wasn't sure it deserved to be burning. But then it found its rhythm, dancing in place against the low hum of the refrigerator and the silence of the house. I sat across from it and just watched. I didn't sing. I didn't make a wish. I didn't close my eyes and whisper a hope to the ceiling. I just breathed. And for the first time in a long while, the air didn't feel borrowed. The quiet wasn't hollow anymore. It was whole, like I'd finally carved out a space in the world that didn't need to be filled by other people's voices or validation. Just me, a slice of time, and a flame that didn't care if it was applauded. After a few minutes, I reached for a knife and cut into the cake. One slice. Clean. No ceremony. No plates being passed. Just the motion of reclaiming something that should have been mine from the beginning. The first bite was sweet and dense, the coconut and chocolate melting together the way it always had. Familiar. Steady. Mine. I set the knife down and took another bite. Then another. Slowly, without rush. I wasn't eating for comfort or out of sadness. I was marking something, closing a chapter with each bite. This wasn't just a birthday cake. It was a symbol of endurance, of quiet strength, of the years I spent thinking that staying silent was the same as being supportive. It wasn't. Silence, I'd learned, was often mistaken for consent, and I'd been complicit in my own erasure. Every time I let a conversation pass me by, every time I swallowed disappointment and called it maturity, every time I excused a thoughtless act by saying they're just tired or they didn't mean it, I'd let myself vanish a little more. No more. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app, not to take a selfie, not to document a moment for likes or sympathy, just the cake, the single slice missing, the candle burning low, wax curling like a question mark. I framed it under the soft kitchen light and clicked once. I opened Instagram and posted the photo without a filter, just that quiet image and a caption. Turns out, it wasn't just a birthday. It was the beginning. No tags, no callouts, no hashtags or clever wordplay, just truth. I didn't expect anyone to respond. I didn't need them to, but I knew they'd see it. Maribel, Tessa, Micah, every one of them who had posted pictures of ribs and laughter and platters full of everything but presents. They would see that small candle, that lone cake, and feel the absence they had created. I set the phone down and watched the last inch of the candle melt into the icing. The flame grew weak, sputtered once, then disappeared in a curl of smoke. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt whole. The kind of wholeness that comes from choosing yourself, not in a defiant shout, but in a steady whisper that says, I'm here. I matter. Even if no one claps. I cleaned up the crumbs, wrapped the rest of the cake, and placed it back in the fridge. Not as a monument anymore, but as a leftover I had earned. I turned off the lights one by one until only the hallway lamp remained. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt like an accusation. I passed by the mirror in the hallway and stopped. I looked into my own eyes, not for signs of strength, not to admire resolve. I just looked, and for the first time in a long time, I recognized the man staring back. Not the man they remembered when they needed something, not the man they leaned on without asking how much weight he could bear, but the man who lit his own candle, cut his own cake, made his own peace. I whispered one thing to him before heading upstairs to sleep alone by choice, not exile. Happy birthday, Silas. And I meant it. A week passed before I saw either of them in person. 7 days of stillness. 7 days without their footsteps echoing through the halls or the sound of Tessa's laughter bouncing off the walls like it used to when she was little and I was still her favorite person. 7 days without Maribel's carefully perfumed presence gliding past me like I was part of the furniture. I didn't miss the noise. I missed the meaning. Or maybe I just missed the version of myself I had been when I believed I was seen. Quentin's condo was a safe kind of limbo. Clean. Temporary. He had left it stocked for me. Some books, a bottle of aged whiskey, Wi-Fi that never dropped. But more than that, he gave me space. He didn't ask questions. He didn't send texts laced with guilt or confusion. He just left the key in the mailbox and said, use it as long as you need. No explanations required. Everyone needs a Quentin. Someone who knows when silence isn't awkward, it's sacred. Then, on the 8th day, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't loud. No urgency. Just 3 steady taps. I waited a second, letting the weight of that sound settle in my chest before walking across the hardwood. Through the peephole, I saw her. Tessa. She stood there in a hoodie and jeans, her hair pulled back like she hadn't slept well in days. There was no trace of the confident college junior who once rolled her eyes at my corny jokes. She looked small, not because of her size, but because of something in her posture, like she was shrinking into herself, unsure of where she stood anymore. I opened the door. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice soft. No smile. I stepped aside without a word, and she walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the space like it was a museum of a man she used to know. She didn't sit. Neither did I. She turned to face me. Her hands were trembling a little as she pulled something from her pocket. A photo. Printed. Glossy. It was the one I'd posted. The cake. The candle. My caption scrawled underneath in her handwriting. She held it up. This broke me, she said. I don't even know why. I took the photo gently, glanced at it, then handed it back. Maybe because it showed you something you weren't ready to see. She nodded. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she blinked fast, trying to fight them. I didn't think you'd care, she whispered. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch long enough to feel honest. Then I said, Tessa, I always cared. You just didn't notice because I never made it a performance. She let out a shaky breath and finally sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders curling forward like a girl caught between guilt and shame. I thought you were okay with it all. With Mom planning things. With Micah being the loud one. I thought you didn't need it. I sat across from her, elbows on my knees. That's the problem, Tessa. I made it look easy. I held the weight so well that none of you ever asked how heavy it really was. She covered her face with her hands and cried. Not a storm. Not a sob. Just the quiet, desperate sound of a daughter realizing she had let someone slip from her frame of view. I'm sorry, she said, voice muffled. I didn't know what we were doing until I saw that photo. And then I saw all the comments on Micah's post. People laughing. Joking that you must be napping. And it hit me, Dad, you were alone. On your birthday. With your own cake. That you bought yourself. I nodded. That's right. She looked up, eyes red. What do I do now? How do I fix it? I leaned back slowly, arms crossed over my chest, not cold, just steady. You don't fix it with flowers or a gesture. You fix it with presence. With choosing to see people while they're still standing in the room. She wiped her eyes. Can I come next week? Just hang out. You don't have to talk. I'll just be there. I considered the offer, not because I needed time to think, but because I wanted her to feel the weight of choice. If you want to, I said. I'll be here. It wasn't forgiveness. It was an invitation. And it was mine to give now. She stayed for another 15 minutes, sipping tea while we talked about safe things, her classes, the weather, some books she was pretending to read for a literature seminar. When she left, she hugged me tighter than she had in years. She didn't say goodbye, just see you soon. When the door closed behind her, I didn't break. I didn't collapse into grief or joy. I just stood there in the stillness, feeling something return to me. Not everything, but something. Later that evening, I lit another candle, this time without the cake. Just the candle. I watched it burn on the windowsill while the city lights flickered on outside. They were starting to notice. Not because I raised my voice, but because I finally stopped whispering. And sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. The first time I heard those words, "It's just a birthday," they were said with a laugh. Offhand, careless, tossed like a wrapper from something already consumed. Maribel didn't even look up from her phone. And when Tessa echoed it, parroting her mother's indifference like a child taught not to make a fuss, I didn't say a thing. I smiled, quietly, but something inside me had already begun to fracture. Now, weeks later, I stood in the same kitchen where it had all started. The air felt clearer somehow, like it had finally shed all the unspoken tension that used to cling to the walls. The house was quieter than I remembered it being even when it was empty, because it wasn't haunted by expectation anymore. It was empty by choice. Mine. I leaned on the counter and stared at the place where the cake had once sat. That single candle. That silent celebration. That was the day the line was drawn. And not with malice or vengeance. With clarity. They had thought it was just a birthday, but it was the first time I lit a flame for myself. Micah and Maribel had tried to rebuild without me. That was their response. Their version of damage control. They called it moving forward. That's what people say when they don't want to admit they took something for granted. Micah scrambled to find new investors, but he couldn't produce the paperwork, couldn't provide ownership, couldn't even access the accounts. Because the accounts were mine. The licenses. The trust. The branding. Every piece of that development was tied to the man they had thought would never leave the table. Maribel didn't post pictures anymore. The curated photos, the carefully captioned updates, the group shots with Tessa in the foreground and me just out of frame, they stopped. She had tried reaching out again. 3 times. The last message was different, though. Short. Simple. Maribel, if you ever want to talk, not about blame, but about being heard. I'll listen. I see it now. I do. I didn't reply. Not because I was cruel. Because I didn't need to be heard by her anymore. I'd already heard myself. Tessa came by once a week now. Not out of obligation. Out of effort. She brought her own coffee, sometimes homework, sometimes silence. She didn't apologize anymore. She didn't try to explain or fix what had happened. She just showed up. And that was enough. The world didn't stop when I stopped showing up for people who had stopped showing up for me. If anything, it opened. I slept better. I worked less and created more. I started sketching again. Just outlines at first, floor plans, storefronts, ideas for places that could be built with purpose instead of ego. Marrow, the project Micah thought was his legacy, became mine in truth. I rebranded it, gave it a new name, Kindling, a reminder that even one spark can change the whole story. I leased a space downtown. Small, brick walls, tall windows. The kind of place people walk past and wonder what's being born inside. I hired 3 interns, young, sharp, eager to learn. Not family, not friends, just people who respected the vision and showed up on time. We started with small projects, renovations, co-working spaces, community hubs. Nothing flashy, but everything meaningful. I never announced it publicly. No grand opening, no ribbon cutting. Just a sign on the door and a door that opened for those who knocked with intention. One afternoon, while we were reviewing a layout for a wellness center in East Ridge, one of the interns asked me, "What made you start this?" I smiled. A cake. They laughed, but I didn't correct them. They didn't need to understand the layers of it, not yet. All they needed to know was that something small and overlooked had become the foundation of something stronger. Maribel and Micah didn't show up again. Maybe they never would. And that was okay. Let them keep their barbecues and their performances. I had learned the difference between a spotlight and sunlight. One burns, the other warms. As my next birthday approached, Tessa asked if I wanted to do anything. "Anything you want," she said. "Even if it's just sitting quietly. I'm there." I looked at her for a long second, then said, "Let's bake something. From scratch." She blinked. Like, together? Yeah. Something messy. Something real. We did. Chocolate cake with imperfect edges and too much frosting. She got flour on her nose. I got egg in my hair. We laughed. Not the polite kind. The belly kind. When we were done, she stuck a single candle in the middle. "You want to light it?" she asked. I shook my head. No need. I remember it. We ate the cake that evening, plates in our laps, movie playing in the background. And for the first time, I wasn't watching life happen to me. I was in it. Centered. Seen. I think that's what birthdays should be. Not a tally, not a show, but a mirror. A chance to ask yourself, am I still living like I matter? This year, I could finally say yes. And next year, I'll say it louder. Because it was never just a birthday. It was the day I lit the match and found myself in the glow.